All right. First rule of this channel, we not talk about this channel. Second rule of this channel, this is not legal advice. So this is going to be the 2024 wide receiver target positional breakdown video. This one, like, who's this year's Puka? Probably not going to be this year's Puka. Who's going to be this year's Nico? That may be a little bit easier to find. When we're looking at the criteria for these guys, we want wide receivers are going to be the target hog for their team, the full route tree, good offenses or opportunity funnels, and okay offenses. They got to be the red zone guy. Like Puka last year was a wide receiver 2 on steroids because he didn't even lead wide receivers on his own team with red zone targets. That was still Cooper Kupp in 12 games. So when we start trying to break these guys down a little bit, and I will bring this on up, like those 6 touchdowns that Puka had, like he wasn't really like that league winner. In general, and I have this written down, like I want to be prioritizing my legendary upside running backs because there's so few of those guys. I also want to be going after my legendary quarterbacks because if I hit those guys are going to give me like more points than any other position. Unicorn tight ends because like there's maybe 1 or 2 of those guys like a season if we're lucky, and then legendary upside wide receivers. After that, like in general, I'm punting wide receiver 2s, and I'm punting quarterback 1s over elite tight ends or elite running backs. Like 17 point a week running backs, like they're still going to have the ability to win me a league. In general, I talk about this with my co-managers. If you're playing for third place, I understand that. I have learned that my little engine that could teams are not good enough, and to hope that somebody else gives me that guy or gives me the ability to win because like they don't score enough points and magically my little engine kit that could team does, like it's not the best way to go out and win a fantasy championship. That's just what I've generally learned. So I've had to be a little bit more aggressive, and that will sometimes like cost me some opportunities. But at the same time, it's been more successful than trying to play it a little bit safe. So with these guys that are out there, so generally speaking, like with Puka, what you were looking at last year was a 5th round draft pick that fell in the draft because of injuries, not because he wasn't good at football. He goes to a team that was projected to not be good on offense in the Rams. So they were not particularly looked well upon from a fantasy community last year. On top of that, they already had a vacated opportunity for the number 2 in an offense. And then Cooper Kupp, the number 1, he gets injured right before the start of the season. And then it just becomes really easy to go like, well, who's going to plug into that hole? That's how we can predict a Puka. Last year in my high school league, which is a deeper league, but it's less competitive, I did draft Nico because any number 1s in any offense are going to have value. That's just generally how we look for it. So wide receiver 2s, I generally will pivot and go different directions all the time because they're safe. And, I understand punts and sometimes I get scared and I punt too. But in general, like that's how I find these guys later in drafts because, you can tell the story where this guy slots into this hole and this is how he's going to function within an offense. So I can find those wide receiver 2s because those guys are projected late and they usually go undrafted. So trying to find this year's Puka, trying to find this year's Nico, like I can probably do that. Versus trying to pay for like a Devontae Smith at like pick 40. I won't do that. I'll go a different direction. I'll miss on that pick because from a fantasy football perspective, punting and picking up a wide receiver 2 or running back 2 is smart. I'm not going to tell you it's not. The guy that goes after that upside player and misses, he's further behind winning his league than the guy who punted. But you know what? The guy who punted, the guy who hits on that upside pick, and remember, like picks 1 through 50 are basically a coin flip. The guy who hits on that pick, he's that much closer to winning the league than the guy who punted. So again, just from strategy standpoint, yeah, I do go like I'm just going to be safe on this one. I'm going to take the layup. And that's why I would generally, and I was going to bring this up and I didn't, and I can remind myself now. The 2021 season really taught me a lot about fantasy football, and that's why like we bring up like our Robert Woods seasons. So for a long time in fantasy football, like I really like the patron saint of fantasy football, Bobby Trees. So in 2018, 2019, 2013, like very strong pick. This is your wide receiver 2. You plug him in your lineup. You don't overthink it. He's your rock. He's your boy. Doesn't win you a league. So every year I'd be like, I'm going to take Robert Woods in the 4th or 5th round of my draft. I'm going to be happy. Doesn't win you leagues. Now, in 2021, because of the way that the landscape was going, I was like, I'm going to punt the wide receiver position because Cooper Kupp was available. DJ Moore was available. Brandon Ayuk was available. Deebo Samuel was available. So what I learned from this year is I can pinpoint the guy who's going to be the number one in his offense and be that opportunity hog, I can do that. But what I also learned in this year is letting the guys fall to me because I'm going to get greedy is probably a very bad idea. So if I can find that guy misappropriately valued, I still have to go up and get him because I missed out on Cooper Kupp by a pick in 2021. And I missed out on Debo by a round because I went after Brandon Ayuk early. So I got Brandon Ayuk and Debo or DJ Moore in 2021. And I missed out on Cooper Kupp and Debo by a pick just based off this process. Now, what I should have done is gone up around on both those guys, and I would have got Cooper Kupp, Debo, Brandon Ayuk, and I would have got DJ Moore, and I would have been right. So sometimes it's just a volume play from a fantasy football perspective. Otherwise, like you can punt, go with the safer guy. Like I do that. Like, it happens sometimes. So breaking this down, like first thing we got to talk about those running backs again. Legendary upside running backs, like want to go after those guys first because there's so few of those guys. They will put up more points than even legendary upside wide receivers usually. So that's why I would go after those guys. From a fantasy football perspective, Christian McCaffrey, Brees, Bijan, maybe Saquon, probably Jahmyr Gibbs, and maybe Travis Etienne. Some of those guys that we're looking at, Rachaad White. Those are going to be the guys that I would be tracking as legendary upside guys. If they're available every time I pick, I'm smashing those guys over and over again, and I'm not going to think about that. The value guys from a wide receiver perspective are going to be like in areas where those legendary upside running backs don't exist, and then that's where I would go after some of those wide receiver ones. The elite level quarterbacks and those unicorn tight ends would also have priority over wide receivers. That's how I generally draft. So a lot of these guys, and I can show you, this would be a general template of what my strategy would be. It doesn't really matter what you're looking at. And then I can break this down by individual wide receivers. And then I can get to the point where like, these would be my targets at wide receiver in the draft. And I bring this up because a lot of these like wide receiver twos, I just will punt and go after those guys later in the draft. So they don't even have a lot of value. So rounds, 4 through 7, maybe like running back dead zone guys, unicorn tight ends, and elite level quarterbacks. And just let the wide receiver position go. If I can't get some of the very few guys that are going to be on the board that meet the criteria of those target hogs, like I will go other directions. And generally speaking, and I bring this up, is I normally in my drafts, oh my God, worst case scenario, like I'm picking like 4 running backs straight in a draft, like usually doesn't come up. Just because of like math and probability, like, the distribution of numbers allows like certain guys to come up at certain points. So I haven't run into a spot. I've only once ran into a spot where like, it's just like, okay, I guess I have to take 4 running backs to start my draft off. In general, one guy will fall to me that I really like at their price, and I will pull the trigger on that guy and be right on that one. So the other thing in 2021, when we break some of these down, some of these wide receiver twos that I will be wrong on, the same reason I will be wrong on running back twos sometimes, the things that we can't predict. Like, so Debo 2021, I didn't think that he was going to run inside zone as a running back in the red zone and have 8 rushing touchdowns to go along with 365 yards rushing. I didn't predict that. If someone predicted that and you can find that guy on the internet, I would suggest like going and listening to that guy because that guy knew something. So some of these guys that that I would generally be wrong on from a strategy perspective, if AJ Brown goes down and Devontae Smith is a league winner, like I could have drafted him, but I couldn't have known that ahead of time. When I talk about like a Jalen Waddle, if Tyreek Hill is over the age apex, like I am interested in Jalen Waddle because of that. Now I have to pay with a Jalen Waddle. I don't want to do that. But at the same time, like I can predict something. And that means like some of these wide receiver twos, I'm a little bit more interested in than other guys that are out there. Let's see. Bringing this up, my numbers. And then in general, like to bring some of this up, like some of the guys that I'm not going to be interested in, I'm going to be looking at like a Chris Olave. Like he just doesn't get red zone targets. This is not how he generally functions. So efficiency guys like your Nico or your Brandon Ayuk, like I will move those guys down because like, you get lucky and the coin goes one direction and you got like, pretty close to a wide receiver one. They don't catch some of those high, lower probability plays. And then you all of a sudden have a wide receiver 3 and you can't always predict that. So I would stay away from those guys when I talk about some of these guys down the line, and we'll just get into it. Like, you want to know who this year's Puka is. You want to know who this year's Nico is. Jalen Polk, he's going outside of draftability on ESPN. He's all the way down here at like 167. Javon Baker's not even on ESPN at this point. They're going at like 191, 195 on ESPN. And right now, because of where Jalen Polk's going, and the only guy I'm really hearing a lot about in that Patriots camp is Jalen Polk, not as much Javon Baker. So now I'm leaning towards changing my entire draft strategy to be able to draft Jalen Polk like he was last year's Puka or last year's Nico. So I am expecting to put him in my cart because he's the guy that like has the easiest road to go like, yeah, he's at least going to be a wide receiver too. He's going to be the number one in his offense. Just because a guy's a number one in his offense doesn't mean that he's going to be fantasy relevant. And just because a guy's a number two in his offense doesn't necessarily mean that he can't like have that league winning upside. But generally speaking, this would be the rule of thumb. So the other guy that I would be tracking during camp is Javon Baker. They may end up both being draftable because of what's going to go on in that offense. Like it's going to be a very interesting. Again, remember last year with Puka, last year with Nico, these were offenses that were projected to at the very least be not good. So I'd be tracking both these guys. Dontavion Wicks, a couple weeks ago when I was looking this up, he was actually like 130 overall. So you got to check your league. Remember, know your league, know the psychology of your league, know your league mates. Know what rankings your league is most likely to use. In this case, like Yahoo, he's going 130. So he's going to be drafted in those Yahoo leagues. It looks like he's going to be the dart throw. Like I do want pieces of the Green Bay offense. He's probably like, there's probably going to be like 5 wide receivers, 2 tight ends, 2 running backs. Like the cheapest guy with the best road to having league winning upside is going to be Dontavion Wicks. Like I'm not going to overthink this too much on that one. So he's fringe draftability. You may be able to knife fight for him in certain leagues. He's going like 252 on ESPN. On Fantasy Pros, he's going like 163. So he's getting up there. He's going to get hype trained up. Everybody's going to be throwing their darts. Remember, in my main money league, those guys have learned to not allow upside guys to hit the waiver wire week 1. So like you're gonna get some of these hype train guys because like no one wants to be wrong and not have Nico on their roster. They don't, or this year's Nico and this year's Puka on their roster. So if we can predict that guy, you know, if he's getting 80% snaps and he's getting red zone usage for the Packers, like I do want to own him. It's pretty simple. I do, as I broke down the Packers last year, I do think Romeo Doubs is going to be the guy that destroys any real value with the Packers, and that includes like Luke Musgrave and Tucker Kraft at tight end. It's just going to be like hard for any of these guys to return, but there's enough there. It's going to cost me relatively nothing to find out with Dontavion Wicks to start season. So the other guys to be tracking as those league winning upside, Khalil Shakur. Yeah, I know like some of the metrics that are out there with him. Like I'm not as concerned with that because like they let Stephon or Gabe Davis walk in free agency, and then they traded Stephon Diggs. Before they went out and they got like Keon Coleman in the draft, and they have Dalton Kincaid. They signed Curtis Samuel to like $7 million a year. That's not like wide receiver 1 money. That's not even wide receiver 2 money. They must have had like Khalil Shakur because he was the only guy that was really left after that. And again, if you're guessing on a guy to have either like wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2 ranges of outcomes attached to an offense that's led by Josh Allen, it would be Khalil Shakur. I would generally bet on Dalton Kincaid being a unicorn. That's why I like Dalton Kincaid. But at the price that you're looking to spend on Khalil Shakur, like 148 Fantasy Pro. So he is up there in that league. ESPN, and this is where it gets like a little bit more interesting. He's going like 183. So like he's not going to be drafted. The biggest thing, and this is like one of the few times I will bring this up, knowing who's going to be in those 2 wide receiver sets for certain teams is going to have value. If Khalil Shakur is a slot only guy, and there's no guarantee that Keon Coleman's going to be the starting X. They did bring in like Makeable Tron and quote unquote, like he's doing well in camp. And they did bring in Matt Collins, and he's just a crafty vet. So there's a possibility that Khalil Shakur isn't even the starting, the starting receiver in 2 wide receiver sets. And that would be pretty easy to go like, I shouldn't even be throwing a dart at him at that point. If he's the guy, and it's Curtis Samuel that's not in those 2 wide receiver sets, like, then you would be we would know by the beginning of the season, like maybe we should be thinking that this is the guy that meets the criteria. Josh Palmer is another one. I would generally be throwing my hat at Lad McConkey, but we can talk about a guy that's going outside draftability that does have the road to be the number 1 in his offense. Probably going to be more of an efficiency guy. So like you're looking at like more of a Nico than you are a Puka. And then he's going at like 141 on Fantasy Pros. He's also going undrafted over here at 179. So if you don't like Lad McConkey, you should probably be throwing your dart at Josh Palmer in that range attached to Justin Herbert. So Luke McCaffrey, probably not going to project to be like a wide receiver 1, but he may end up being more of the volume guy attached to like Jaden Daniels in that offense. And it really just becomes an issue of price. So like 292 on Fantasy Pros, like, yeah, he's just undrafted at this point. On ESPN, this would be something else to be looking at, like 234. So he may end up getting up there to be like fringe draftability in certain leagues, depending on what we hear in camp. And then finally, like Roman Wilson. So what's his face? George Pickens is going to end up being a little bit capped. And again, he's an efficiency guy. I tend to not like efficiency guy. I do like a certain amount of safe floor when it comes to some of my league winning type upside guys. So there's that possibility in that Steelers offense based off capital. He's a 3rd round draft capital, Roman Wilson, that the guy that's going to be counted on to get like the 3rd and 7s, those are going to be the guys that are giving you the very solid floor with upside. It's going to be great. Roman Wilson. So he's going 222 on Fantasy Pros, and over here on ESPN, he's going all the way. Where's this one at? He's going at 263. So again, probably not a guy that I have to be drafting. It's a guy that I should know about week 1, going like, well, what's the snap share? Is he in the 2 wide receiver sets? Because like the Steelers do project to be a lot of 2 tight end sets. So that means like he has to be the number 2 wide receiver, and then he has to have a particular role within the offense at that point. But these would be the guys that I would be tracking as, this year's Puka, this year's Nico, like the top 10 wide receiver upside of these guys that I would be looking at in general. So moving on from that, like, hey, these are the guys like Internet Man does not have to tell you how to run your team. So CeeDee Lamb, Garrett Wilson, Justin Jefferson, AJ Brown. The reason why I like these guys relative to the other guys that are going in your drafts would be because they are opportunity funnels within their offenses, and they run, quote unquote, the full route tree, and they're going to get their red zone opportunities. Like, I can take other guys off my board, and I'll just go over this real quick before I break down CeeDee Lamb and Garrett Wilson, AJ Brown and Justin Jefferson real quick. Is I can take certain guys off my board, like your Tyreek Hill, your Devontae Adams, Mike Evans, Stephon Diggs, Cooper Kupp, Keenan Allen, Amari Cooper, DeAndre Hopkins, Mike Williams, Tyler Lockett, and Adam Thielen. They can just be taken off my board because of injury or age. And, can they have that upside year? Is this like risky by saying, hey, I'm just not going to draft them? Yes. But when these guys take that like step back from a productive standpoint, and maybe we can think it's from like age or injury, like, yeah, we could have predicted that ahead of time. So like, it becomes an issue of like how much farther they would fall in a draft before I feel comfortable taking them. Some of these guys, if they don't have a road to being the number 1 in their offense, like an Adam Thielen, Tyler Lockett, Mike Williams, like I don't even have to overthink that guy. DeAndre Hopkins, Amari Cooper, like Keenan Allen, Mike Evans, Devontae Adams, and Tyreek Hill. Like, do I have some interest in them? Absolutely. How far they have to fall in the draft before I pull the trigger on them, that's going to be the different conversation. Probably somebody else is going to go up there and take them, so I don't even have to think about it. In the case of some of these guys, like if there's that legendary upside running back, around that range, I'm probably going to go after those guys. Some of these guys, like your Mike Evans and your DeAndre Hopkins, like Amari Cooper, there are guys that I can go cheaper in my draft to have theoretically the same range of outcomes. Again, the ceiling is higher on your Chris Godwins, your Jerry Judys, some of those guys out there, your Calvin Ridleys, than spending the cost on some of the other guys that are out there with the flaw that we can project ahead of time with that age or the injury with those guys. So in the case of these 4 guys, like AJ Brown, he already gets the targets. The big problem with AJ Brown, you're looking at like having to track those receptions. So from a draft strategy standpoint, like where I would pull the trigger on your AJ Brown, if there isn't that legendary upside running back in that range in my draft, I'm just going to go AJ Brown. This would be a punt. This is a nice punt. It's a safe punt. I don't think he's going to necessarily get the red zone opportunities to end up being that guy to have that like Cooper Kupp 2021 season. And this is why I bring up like this 2021 season with Cooper Kupp. If you're not getting that legendary upside wide receiver, the guy who gets that legendary upside running back is going to have the better road to win his league. So the only time you want to be pulling the trigger on that wide receiver is if that running back's not available, or that wide receiver it has that road to be that legendary upside guy, like the guy that we're going to remember in the future, this 2021 Cooper Cup season. So in general, that's why like Puka, as great as he was in 2023, he wasn't this Cooper Cup season. Like these are not the same thing when we start trying to break these guys down. So if I can go out in there, I can find this Puka season later in my draft, like that's fine. I can do that. I can be wrong on that guy. I don't want to be wrong on this 2021 Cooper Cup season. So that's just generally how I would look at these guys. So Justin Jefferson, I'm not as down on Sam Darnold, JJ McCarthy. I think Kevin O'Connell's a good coach. I think he'll get the most out of the offense. I also like the fact that, like, TJ Hawkins is probably not going to be as much involved with the offense, even maybe later in the season. So there's less opportunity. All I need is Jordan Addison to pull enough coverage away from Justin Jefferson to give me the theoretical possibility of that legendary upside season, because we've already seen that in 2022. He can do that. He showed he can do that. He can be that guy. That's too easy. Garrett Wilson, he's going to be that guy. We're going to talk a little bit more about Garrett Wilson when I get to Malik Neighbors, but in general, opportunity funnel, all he's got to do is get enough good quarterback play from Aaron Rodgers to jump up into that tier of red zone opportunities and design full quote-unquote pass tree, route tree. CeeDee Lamb, same thing. The closest thing to opportunity or competition for opportunity that he's going to have is Jake Ferguson, a tight end, and 31-year-old Brandon Cook. So, I would feel pretty good that maybe I don't get a legendary upside season. Last year, he led all wide receivers in red zone opportunities. Maybe I don't get that, but you know what I'm going to get at the price that he's going? I'm going to get like a pretty good guy. So maybe the only way I don't pull the trigger on CeeDee Lamb is because I'm chasing one of those legendary upside running backs. But if he's my first round draft pick, I'm not going to be upset about it. I've already talked about this with Garrett Wilson. Because of that upside, that legendary upside season, and with Garrett Wilson, like I could see him going up there as high as the 105. Probably would be liking the ability to get Garrett Wilson as either a late first round draft pick, so I could have the flop in my snake draft leagues, or to get him in the early second round if I'm lucky enough to get him. Now, guys like Justin Jefferson, like the reason why I have him highlighted the way he is, some of these guys I would hope that maybe because of the situation, I can take advantage of them at cost. This would be more like an auction league thing, more than likely, because a guy like Justin Jefferson, he is the 105. You ain't getting a discount on him. So, like, in general, like I again, maybe some of the guys out there are going to be a little bit concerned with the quarterback situation. I'm not particularly upset about that. The Sun God, there's a lot of competition for opportunity in that offense. That worries me a little bit. He is imperfect. Just Jamar Chase, there's a lot of competition for opportunity in that offense. Puka, there's competition. I think the offense is going to be a little bit more run heavy. Sometimes teams tell you what they're going to do. In this case, when you're looking at the Rams, what they're telling you that they're going to do is probably run the football. They drafted Blake Corum third round draft. They brought in and paid a good blocking tight end in this offense. So yeah, he wasn't even the red zone guy last year. He generally would be a guy that like I would be prioritizing, like a Ja'Marr Chase, if he's in the same range of the draft. And 13th overall versus 10 overall, like Puka, I would probably go up on the Jahmyr Gibbs. I've talked about that. Like when I broke him down, that receiving upside that's there, like I would be probably chasing that theoretical upside season if you're wondering about that. I already talked about like AJapex guys. Chris Olave, not a red zone guy. Michael Pittman's probably going to be limited within the offense. I will have this caveat when I talk about what Michael Pittman, know your league settings, because as a punt, 19 overall Michael Pittman, probably not the best allocation of capital. But when I go look over on your Fantasy Pros leagues, Michael Pittman going 34 overall, yeah. Maybe the theoretical upside that I got, like a wide receiver 5, is that 34 overall would be something I'd be interested in going after in this case. This next group of guys, like I would probably move Marvin Harrison and what's right here. Marvin Harrison and Drake London up into that top 10 tier of guys. You probably are chasing the upside. So in this ESPN league, I don't think they're going to be going like 34, 35. If they are, like, this is for my auction league. If they are inappropriately valued and I have to spend like $23, $22 on these guys to be my wide receiver ones, like I would be happy to do that. I'm not going to overthink that, because you are going to pay for the upside of theoretically getting that volume hog red zone guy, that legendary upside season. It would be theoretically there. Sometimes you're going to have to pay for that. On your Fantasy Pros leagues, like Drake London's going 23, Marvin Harrison Jr. is going 24. I have seen them getting mocked up into like the early teens. Like I think they're going to be gone in most leagues, but in general, I would put them there. And again, you're going to be weighing those type of outcome season because sometimes you're going to have to pay for it. I don't like to pay for guys' ceilings. I don't think you're necessarily paying for those guys' ceilings. You're paying for them to be appropriately valued about pick 20 overall. So I would talk about them a little bit. All right, moving on to the running or rookie wide receivers. Malik Neighbors, generally, I like to stay away from bad offenses. And in this case, with like the Giants, this is where I would bring up Malik Neighbors relative to your Garrett Wilsons. Last year with the Jets, like didn't have a great quarterback with the Jets, didn't have the ability to pull coverage away from Garrett Wilson. 168 targets, they weren't very efficient. Yeah, you could be getting that. When it comes to Malik Neighbors, he's appropriately valued. I think I was looking at this ahead of time. He's going 57 on Fantasy Pros. On ESPN, he's going somewhere in the range of 49. Yeah, you're paying to find out. And in general, there are guys later in drafts that I would probably rather pay to find out because I can be wrong on. Malik Neighbors, if you're getting like Garrett Wilson, like wide receiver 36, like good luck getting him off your roster. I do think Daniel Jones is probably like a little too maligned versus like maybe all he has to do. But like, are you looking at the theoretical possibility of like 180 target Malik Neighbors year with that athletic ability? Yeah. So I don't necessarily wouldn't go as far as say like Malik Neighbors is a punt, but it's going to be risky. You got to be that guy that like, again, wants to win your league. Probably not going to be a guy that I would be targeting because again, those roster spots to begin a season are going to be, there are going to be other guys that I would be putting in my cart around this area. And again, like I talked about this, like legendary upside season quarterbacks, elite quarterbacks, unicorn tight ends. That's the guys that I'm going to be having to look at pulling the trigger on in the range of a Malik Neighbors. So it generally probably would end up being someone else's problem relative to where he's going in the drafts. That's like the biggest problem with him. Rome, you're looking at a lot of competition for opportunity there. His price is generally better. So like if you're going to be pulling the trigger on Rome to go in the range of like 105 on ESPN, like I understand that. I don't even know if I wrote him down on Fantasy Pros to go hunt him and see if he's going like in general. Probably going to be the boom bust guy. Getting a piece of the Bears offense probably not going to be like a horrible idea. I do generally like Lad McConkey to have the best overall upside of all the rookies. In general, I do think Brian Thomas Jr. is probably going to be the guy to win leagues at the end of the season, even though I think it may be a harder road. So just be advised, like with Brian Thomas Jr., like if you're pulling trigger on him, it may take a while for him to turn into that like 10 target a game guy. Like he's the most complete guy of all the rookie wide receivers, the best situation, the best skill set, the best quarterback. Like that's the guy. So may not look like he's going to win a league, and then to own him going into playoffs probably going to be the best way to go out and do it. Xavier Worthy, I think he's going to be limited within the offense, and there's going to be a lot of competition for opportunity. So I'm not generally interested in that. Would generally talk about like Keon Coleman. I don't like him because I generally think like, before they knew they were going to get Keon Coleman, they had Dalton Kincaid, they had Khalil Shakur. In this case, like I think he's going to be limited. We will know if he's even the starting X at the beginning of the season versus like maybe going to have that ability down the line. Even if he's the starting X, would he end up actually being the target hog? Like, some X's end up just being that boom bust type of guy. That would be a little bit more what I worry about. If you're spending on Keon Coleman, the other thing to remember is he may end up being the red zone guy. So like the touchdown guy. So it's not that he's unvaluable. Where he's going in drafts is going to be the thing. Like 132 on Fantasy Pros. On ESPN, it's a little bit better or a little bit worse where he's going like 108. In general, like why I would be down on him is because like I like Lad McConkey and Brian Thomas Jr. better as guys. If you're wondering about all that, and then Xavier Leggett, he's going to be fringe. We can tell the story because of draft capital and theoretically a vacated number one in that offense. Again, who's this year's Puka? He's right there on the line. So on your Fantasy Pros leagues, I looked this up ahead of time. He's going 171, so he's outside of draftability. On your ESPN leagues, he's going like 129, so he would be inside draftability. So wouldn't meet the criteria of this year's Puka, even though we could theoretically go, hey, can we tell the story where he's the opportunity hog in this offense, and an offense that we thought was going to be not good is actually like not bad. We can tell that story when it comes to Xavier Leggett. So again, I'm less concerned with like I don't like this guy as a prospect. We're not a real fantasy or we're not a real football channel. This is a fantasy football channel. We're trying to go, can I take advantage of price? Does he do the full route tree? Yes. Can he get designed opportunities? Yes. Can he take every touch to the house? Yes. That's the main thing that I would be looking at with Xavier Leggett. Now, because of the capital that that I would have to put into him, which means he could probably go for free in most leagues. Not entirely sure that I would be spending on him at the start of the season. Like this would be like a priority guy. Like, is he on the field? Is he hitting the snap share? Are we going to be tracking him through the season? Is he going to be the target hog at the beginning of the year? Like, this may not be a guy that I need to have on my bench. And this is generally the same thing with Brian Thomas. Like, I don't know if I need to spend the pick on him at this point. I'll know by the time fantasy football drafts happen if I got to spend on him. Lad McConkey in this group, like I know right now that like they spent on him. They don't have a wide receiver one in this offense. The closest thing for competition that Lad McConkey is going to have is Josh Palmer, and I already talked about him as theoretically having that road to be one of those guys this year. Like that's going to be the guy. They went out and they spent on a blocking tight end, and their last year number one kind of was a bust. And Quentin Johnson, they went and they signed DJ Shark to play that X position. This is going to be interesting. If Lad McConkey is the Z and he's on the field with those two tight end sets for the Chargers, like there's that road for league winner attached to them in this offense. And that's why I'm really big on your Lad McConkey's. He doesn't meet the criteria for this year's Puka because he's going within draftability. That would be the only critique on him. I also talked about him in the Chargers show where the Chargers don't have to necessarily be a high volume passing offense. They just have to be efficient. And if he's getting like a bulk of the targets and they are both the low probability, high productive passes, and he's able to hit on those, but he's also the 3rd and 7, hey, I need a first down guy. And you're getting all that together. Like, yeah, you're getting very close to a wide receiver one. I don't even need him to be a wide receiver one at the range that he's going. I just need him to produce as a weekly starter, like in that flex wide receiver 2 role, for him to be able to return on investment. So if he's going on Fantasy Pros at 112 and then on ESPN he's going like 107, like this would be a guy that I would target because like I can go other directions in my draft knowing that I have a guy that I would generally start the season on for a starter going that late with all that upside. All right, next group of guys, these are going to be the wide receivers that like have those roads to being the number ones within their offense and they're like undervalued relative to the price. Now, first off, like Calvin Ridley on your ESPN league, he's appropriately valued. He's 48 overall. I don't know, like there's going to be some risk involved with him when it comes to like, is Will Levis going to take a step forward? Calvin Ridley is going to turn 30 this year, so that's in December. But like it is something to be really monitoring. A lot of conversations like, is he like a true number one in the offense? It doesn't really matter. You're going to probably be spending on a guy that you can, get a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 at that range. What makes him really interesting is when I got to go spend like 67 overall with upside. So I do like that more. So again, like know your league. So he's going 67 overall on Fantasy Pros. So like I'll pull the trigger on that. Like the road to being the number one in his offense, like top 10 wide receiver, like that, it's there with Calvin Ridley. I don't particularly have to overthink that one. Chris Godwin, this is going to be another price disparity. So we already have Mike Evans. If you like Mike Evans, you probably shouldn't like Chris Godwin. If you don't like Mike Evans, take the chance on the other guy in the offense that can be the opportunity funnel. The thing with Chris Godwin is he does have this 2019 season when he finishes wide receiver 2. Now he's been dealing with some injuries and some other stuff that's going on. Like this would be one of the guys that like slowly but surely is creeping up on my, hey, maybe I should take a dart throw at him. So if he's going in this range on ESPN at 54 overall, yeah, it's fine. It's a good pick. But then I go over like a Fantasy Pros league and I go find that Chris Godwin's going 73 overall. Like, yeah, probably in the range of like, well, who else am I going to be taking in this range of the draft? That's as simple as it goes on that. A guy like Dalton Kincaid, Zamir White, I might be going up on. So like a guy like Chris Godwin, like I probably would like him to follow me in this range, but I also would like to go up and get a guy like him. So again, like know your draft when it comes to tracking guys that have the theoretical road to be the number one in their offense. So we're looking at the same thing with Terry McLaurin. This is opposite where you look at another guy that could be the target hog in his offense, full route tree, hasn't been used in the red zone. That could be an issue of quarterback play, less so than his skill set. So 83 overall on ESPN, I really like that. I would be targeting him there. On your Fantasy Pros leagues, he's at 60. I've seen him go as far as like 58. So that's probably closer where he should be valued. So again, know your league on that one. But this is about guys that we can tell the story about being the number one in their offenses. And if they're the number one in their offense, they can get home from an efficiency play standpoint. Remember, with your Nico Collins shares, or they can get home from a volume-based standpoint if they're their Puka Nacua shares in this case. So moving on, let's see. Next group, guys, Cortland Sutton. This is going to be another issue of price. He's going at 99 overall in Fantasy Pros. He was going like a little bit worse on ESPN, like 86. Maybe Kyle Pitts in this range I would have more interest in. Again, in general, with some of these upside tight ends that could be like the number one and number two in their offenses. I have to bring this up. You get a legendary outcome tight end or close to that, like just an elite level tight end, 1,100 yard, 7 touchdown Kyle Pitts season, and you're passing on him to go after like a Deontay Johnson or a Terry McLaurin or a Cortland Sutton that have the same type of range of outcomes from an overall production standpoint. The tight end should always have priority because the tight end can win you a league being a tight end in a way that a wide receiver 2 can't. These guys that are capped out. So in general, like that would be the one thing about like your Cortland Suttons and your Terry McLaurins that like I have to see what are the other league winning upside guys that are in the range that I would be willing to look at. Let's see, going back this one. This group of guys, like I do have to talk about. These are the guys that I won't touch with your roster. Be advised, but these are the smart plays. If you're into that punting thing. So Deontay Johnson probably going to end up being the number one attached to this offense for the Panthers. They can't be worse than they were last year. So in general, he should be serviceable, and he's going at a range like where you're going to pay to you're not going to pay to find out that you're wrong. So 78 on Fantasy Pros, and over here on ESPN, he's going to be going like 82 overall. I wouldn't target him, but I also think it would be like negligent to not realize that like your Deontay Johnsons, your Christian Kirks, they are going to finish as wide receiver 2s from a fantasy perspective. They may end up being wide receiver 1s from a real life perspective. They're going to be limited in their offenses. Again, even Christian Kirk, he's going, bring this up, on ESPN, he's going at like 84 overall. Like where he's going, considering that like you're looking at maybe he's the number one attached to Trevor Lawrence, and he did like wide receiver 11 in 2022. Like, yeah, these guys are underpriced. They do have that road. They're going to be capped. I generally go other directions, but they are going to be the guys to go after. Jerry Jeudy, the Browns did trade for him. They did re-sign him to basically like mid-range to higher end wide receiver 2 money. I'm less interested in him, but you are looking at Mari Cooper being over the age apex. So we can tell that story where he is the wide receiver 1 attached to this offense. 145 on Fantasy Pros. And then on ESPN, it's not quite as good where you're looking at him going like 125. Again, there are guys that I would rather go after with higher theoretical upsides than these guys. But we can tell the story about how these guys can return on investment already relative to some of the other guys. Now, the other guys, if you're wondering that I haven't talked about, you're looking at like cannibalization of targets. So like Brandon Ayuk and Debo, hey, these are some of the best punts that you can have in your league. But guess what? They're probably not going to be able to tell the story how they win a league. Even if one of them goes down, you're looking at Ricky Pearsall, the first round draft pick, and George Kittle to be able to take over those targets. Nico, and I have this one pulled up. I think it's right here. So actually, it's this one. So your Nico Collins, your Stephon Diggs, and Tank Dells, I generally would be not interested in because you're going to have to pay to get pieces of these offenses, and there's going to be a lot of cannibalization of targets. So there's probably just as good a chance that on any given week these guys will lose you it as they will win you it. They probably could be someone else's problem. Stephon Diggs, I could say like over the age apex, probably going to be the safer play than Tank Dell. Tank Dell's probably going to be the boom bust guy. Nico Collins is going to be like, I do like Nico Collins as a player. I do like him with his offense. I talk about this a lot. Teams are generally trying to win. So a good season by a player does not necessarily translate into a good fantasy season. And that's part of the thing I would bring up when I talk about like Jamar Chase. I do like Jamar Chase. There's going to be a lot of competition for opportunity in that offense. So trying to say that we could say Jamar Chase is going to end up with like a legendary upside season is probably going to be very limited because of how many mouths there are to feed in that offense. They don't need Jamar Chase to be anything more than like a 1,200-yard receiver with 7 touchdowns because everybody else can get home because he is opening up the offense. That's why I would stay away from some of these guys that are out there. Moving on to this next tier, DK is probably going to be an efficiency guy. I do like the price that he's going at. I just don't know how he's going to get me to that next tier, guys. I'm probably going to burn a roster spot that I could go after a running back or a quarterback in this range. DJ Morgan, this is why I have this one brought up when I talk about this offense. So I already talked about Rome probably being the boom bust guy in this offense. He would be the guy I would go after at cost relative to where he's going in most of the leagues. Keenan Allen's going to be the safe guy, going to be capped because of age and probably within the role of the offense. Like again, DJ Moore, he's fine. Probably going to be a little bit capped. Again, I generally stay away from guys that have some type of a lot of competition for targets that I can't predict ahead of time. And that means that like you're buying a cap season with DJ Moore. We don't even necessarily know if that offense is going to be good. In the same way, like the Texans, we can at least project forward. The Bears might be a little bit disappointing. And again, you're going to have to pay generally to find out with your DJ Moores. Devontae Smith, again, he's number 2. I would generally stay away from number 2s. You're hoping for a DJ Moore injury. Jalen Waddle, this is all price. I would generally like to have bet on him if he was like a 5th round draft pick. Where he's going in draft, he's 43 on ESPN. He's 31 on Fantasy Pros. Like you're paying to find out if there is a step back from Tyreek Hill because of age in this offense. Cooper Kupp, again, he's age. Zay Flowers, I don't think he's the number 1. It doesn't actually matter if he does become the target hog in this offense. He's probably not going to be the red zone guy. They got Derrick Henry. They got Mark Andrews. He shouldn't be someone else's problem. T. Higgins, again, not the number 1. I already talked about Tank Dell, Keenan Allen. Chris Godwin, I like. Amari Cooper. George Pickens is going to be an efficiency guy. I don't really want to be having him be someone else's problem. Few other guys that I would talk about. So Curtis Samuel, even at $7 million a year, he does have the road to be the number 1 in that offense. Something to be thinking about. Again, we're tracking in camp who's going to be the number 1, number 2 wide receivers. If it's Curtis Samuel, I would move him up my board. Talking about the Kansas City receivers, probably capped out with Rashee Rice. A lot of competition for opportunity in that offense. If you're buying these guys, yeah, they have very good prices to them. From a Fantasy Pros perspective, 81 and 83. On ESPN, I would generally go after Hollywood Brown at 104 over your Rashee Rice at 58. You're looking at like 1,100 yards, 7 touchdown wide receiver 2s. That's what they're capped out at with these guys. Like if they all hit, because they're probably not going to be running quote unquote the full route tree and they're not going to be opportunity funnels, you're buying flawed guys. And in general, if I know they're going to be flawed or I think they're going to be flawed, I will go a different direction, even though at their prices, yeah, they're going to be good prices. They're going to return on investment where they're going. Like there are certain points in some of my drafts, like I just look at everybody that's around and what I'm projecting to be drafting in the next round of my draft, and I will pull the trigger on these guys. So I think it would be negligent for me to say like, yeah, they're not good picks. Jackson Smith-Njigba at the prices that he's going at, like I do like it in general, like 93 on Fantasy Pros to theoretically be the target guy in the Seahawks offense, like the opportunity guy versus DK being the efficiency guy. Like, yeah, I would generally like that in general. Again, going to be capped out as a wide receiver 293 overall on ESPN. Let's see if I got everybody I want to talk about today. Already talking about Nico again. With Nico in that offense, like you are buying a efficiency guy, and there's going to be a lot of competition for opportunity in this offense. Talk about DJ Moore. Talk about all these guys that are out there. I want to make sure that these are all the guys I already broke down. And to summarize all this for those out there, I know this comment was out there. This year's Puka, guys that are going outside of draftability that have the ability to win leagues, Jalen Polk, Javon Baker, Dontavion Wicks. Those are going to be the main 3 guys. I do like Luke McCaffrey, Roman Wilson, Josh Palmer, Khalil Shakur to maybe be wide receiver 2s. The main guy that I would be looking at is like Lad McConkey, and then Brian Thomas is going to be like the back end of the season, like the playoff guy that I would be looking at winning leagues in general. And then again, going after legendary upside running backs over wide receivers. That's just the way to go in your drafts. And then punt on wide receiver 2s versus upside tight ends and quarterbacks. Generally how I go after it, because I have the ability to find like your Jalen Polks, your Khalil Shakurs, your Josh Palmers, Roman Wilsons, Dontavion Wicks, Luke McCaffrey's in free agency after week 1 to be my wide receiver 2 within my offense. So anyway, that's about all I got from a 2024 wide receiver target positional breakdown video. I probably will come back and break down the wide receiver position a little bit more as the offseason breaks down. And then if you're wondering, I will be listening to some of the camp news and breaking down some of the battles that I think are going to be going out there. That's kind of the general idea of what will be going on. Camp actually starts. I think I have this, if I can pull this up. I think the first camp actually opens on July 13th. And then the camps start opening slowly but surely after that. I want to see if I can bring this up so I can hunt it down. The first camp, and I can't actually read it right here. The camps start opening, and the first one is 16 is San Francisco, 16 is the Giants. I think one of them, 16 is the Chargers. Chicago's on the 16th. The 13th, Baltimore opens up. So like we're 3 days out from camp starting to open up. So we will start getting camp news opening up this week. So anyway, that's about all I got. And yeah,